All right, let's call the meeting to order. At first, we will stand and recite the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands,
one nation,
one nation, under God,
indivisible, with
liberty and justice for all.
Great. Thank you very much. And Kristen, if you could call roll call, please.
Bruce Angell,
Here.
Tim Dean,
Here.
Mike Thomas,
Here,
Jan Berg. She's absent, and Yvonne Van Ornum, who's also absent tonight.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. And at this point, let's entertain a motion for approval of the agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
Okay, I'll second that.
Second, any discussion on it? No discussion. We'll move to a vote. All in favor?
All
Aye.
right.
Aye.
Thank you. Looks like we're okay with the agenda. Let's move on now to approval of the consent agenda.
I move to approve the consent agenda.
I'll second.
All right, any discussion on that? So no discussion on that, then we vote on it. All in favor of the consent agenda, aye.
All right.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. So that was easy. We'll move on to the next item. Discussion items today will be, number one will be the Smoky Point Boulevard corridor design discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I do appreciate the signature and the support by the commission in totality with the letter moving forward. I will let you know that the letter will be going to City Council in March, at a workshop in March. The reason I delayed it until March is because there are some things that have taken place since we talked about this last, in that there was direction given to Public Works in order to reevaluate the corridor and the existing and future roadway connections around the corridor in the transportation network, which will have an impact on this. And so in order to be fair with this, I want to gather all that information and where we were, where we're going, where we are currently when this letter is presented to City Council. So just to let you know, that's why there's a delay going on. But I will share tonight with you what direction we're headed now. So you'll bring the map up, Kristen. Much better. I can't see it. So hang on a second. So I want you to pay attention to the map here. And this dashed dark line that's running on top of that green overlay, if you can see up here, what it's doing is it's actually representing a new arterial routing. So instead of the arterial routing running down through Smoky Point corridor here, it is now coming down to 188th, going east on 188th, and then tying into Airport Boulevard and continuing on down 51st and into Marysville. So that is bypassing that traffic from out of the mixed-use neighborhood we're trying to create here in the roadway design and putting it down where it belongs, down through this corridor into 51st, which goes directly to Marysville and makes that intertie with the city of Marysville. So that's the direction we're headed now with this. That way we can continue with our proposed design for the mixed-use neighborhood between 188th and 178th here. So positive things are happening. This has to go to Puget Sound Regional Council for their approval in order to change the scope of the grant application and show that this actually meets what the intent was from the grant application originally. So that will be occurring here in the next couple of weeks. So I will give you an update at our next workshop.
Well, it makes a lot more sense.
Certainly does, doesn't it?
Yeah, considering that's where all the, a lot of the truck traffic is going to be coming from that direction. So,
Exactly. Yeah.
and then there will be a roundabout eventually, correct, at 172nd and
51st.
where it enters. Yeah, 51st.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's a roundabout plan there. Every intersection except for 40th on 172nd will receive a roundabout.
Yeah, that's what makes.
Roundabouts on this plan all night.
Hey, Mark,
Yes.
is there a chance we might be able to get a copy of that sent to us?
Well, certainly. I actually have another one, even more updated, that will serve another purpose, but it will be a great discussion item, and I will provide that one also.
Wonderful, because this is more, I think, in line with what we had discussed in the past, but it also seems to be kind of maybe an improvement on what we were discussing in the past. I don't want to get that flamboyant, but I'm telling you, it seems to me like, Commissioner Thomas was saying that how it makes sense since that's kind of where the bulk of the traffic is going to be
Exactly.
going, if it's going to be a northbound truck going north on I-5, let's put it that way. So that does make sense to me.
Well, it potentially could be faster than going southbound too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You could go
Yeah.
north and then turn around and come back.
Good point. And then of course it would beat, you'd miss all the congested traffic or just
Yes.
the general traffic indeed. So this is going to be, Mark, is this going to be a truck route? Because I know that truck routes actually have there's certain criteria that make it a truck route. Is that
It's
true?
currently designated as a truck route. We will have that re-evaluated and change that designation so that the truck route would be from Island Crossing to 188th, but in there, because it'll be directed over to Airport Boulevard at that point.
Right.
What
And
is the intersection type at 188th and Airport Boulevard? That's probably been asked.
That's a roundabout.
That's the roundabout.
Okay. Well,
If
this
you like,
kind of
that's
thing-
where you see the one I'm gonna show you next week.
okay.
You'll really like it.
So in the road classification system, what is that remaining portion of Smoky Point Boulevard south of 188th called? How is it classified?
Well, it will be, really, it'll be just a mixed-use boulevard. And so it'll be more of it won't even be a collector, it'll be more between a local access.
So we'll call,
It really serves as a local access is what it does.
so that seems to take off the pressure of trying to justify it as being in the kind of configuration we've been talking about. And because now we don't have to consider, if it's local access, we don't have to consider throughput.
Right. Yeah. The only caveat to that is because you're bringing in two alignments into Smoky Point Boulevard, it could be determined that it's a collector for that very reason, but with the design and the functionality that we're trying to propose here, it really services as a local access.
Because this certainly strengthens the argument for making that the 2-lane with the drop off.
Right.
I mean, because what's the resistance now?
Yeah, there isn't.
Wonderful.
And
Well-
there is a there's a whole lot of stuff on flexibility in designing that kind of road, federal highway, NASCA, ASHCO, whatever they have. I mean, every traffic engineering publication is now talking about flexibility, and that ties directly in with what Vision 2050 is doing.
Yes.
And I got a draft of the countywide planning policy,
I was just reading those.
and they just mirror the multi-county.
So Mark, what would be like the next step with this? I mean, has this already been proposed, or is this something yet to be proposed?
I did just get an email at 5:15 this evening that this has been proposed to someone at PSRC
Okay,
to look at it for evaluation of whether or not it actually meets the original intent of the grant application.
okay. And so the grant application has yet to be put together and sent out that way to you. Okay,
Well,
Right.
the revised, yes.
The grant application is for the study, correct?
The grant application was already submitted back, it was created in 2018, submitted, that's where the 5-lane came out of.
Right, but that's the study, not the doing of.
We're now going back and saying, no, we're revising the corridor here in order to accommodate for a corridor and in that flow of traffic. And to make sure that it's still applicable to receive grant funding.
How much of an argument are you gonna have to make for that? Are you pretty sure it's?
I know the Public Works is doing that right now.
Oh,
So.
okay.
and as far as we know, they're on board with this proposal, okay, so, right?
Yeah, and so, the letter that is being drafted up by Planning Commission will be in support of this concept, so.
Perfect. All right, any further discussion on this? And then I'd like to do something a little unusual this evening. We do have a guest that wanted to speak about this specific topic, and I didn't want to keep her. That's her name showing up as Kayla. Is that right? I didn't want to put Kayla all, having to sit through our next discussion item number 2, just to have her
Can you hear me right
opportunity to speak. So we can hear you now, Kayla. If you'd like to address the council or the commission, excuse me, we're here.
Well, I just wanted to say, looking at this, I love the idea of those roundabouts. I'm actually just going to put in positive feedback if that's okay. I love the idea of the roundabouts on 188 and on the airport Boulevard. That's perfect, I think.
Great, we love positive feedback.
Are you still planning on doing the proposed collector, the one on what, I think it's 174th?
So there, if you look, 173rd is the blue line, the dashed blue line you're looking at.
Yes.
But there is a little connector to tie 174th to 40th Avenue.
Okay.
And so we are evaluating that in the future.
That just seems, does that seem noisy for those people that live in that vicinity? I don't know.
No, not necessarily. I mean, what would happen there is it actually would be a great improvement because that street would be fully improved, curb gutter sidewalk, planter strips, trees, all of that. So you'd have a true residential street there.
Oh, that's nice. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's really where we're going with that. But if you stay tuned, I will, when I propose and give you the other, or when I give the commission the other map that shows some of our proposed transportation network ideas, this will make a whole lot more sense to you.
Okay. But yeah, I love the roundabouts. Yay. I love the roundabouts.
Great.
Thank you for letting me say that. That's all I needed to say.
All right.
Thank you very much. You're welcome anytime.
Thank you very much for that. And we always appreciate input from the public. And of course, they're invited at any time to join these meetings. The next item, we don't have any voting. This is strictly a discussion item. So we'll move on to discussion item number 2, which is the WRIA 7 Watershed Restoration and Enhancement Plan.
Hold on 1 second. 1 moment, please.
Yeah, just press tab. Again. There you go.
But how do I get?
Press escape. And you can do full screen.
Let's do full screen, please. 1 moment, please. There we go. Thank you.
The one that I sent tonight,
You want me? Yep, I can get there.
the one that I sent this afternoon.
Yep, we got that on here. There we go.
Starts right there.
that's-
There you are.
It's continuous from that.
Yep. Thank you.
Very
Thank you
good.
for your patience.
Commissioners and staff, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak tonight. My name is Mike Wolonek. I've been with the City of Arlington Public Works Utilities Division for about 16 years. And I think in all of that time, this is the second time I've had a chance to address the Planning Commission. First time in almost that long. So it's a pleasure. I always have a lot to say, so I'm going to try and compress a bunch in to this presentation with the whole idea that you've already been provided. If your interest is even pricked a little, you've got resources that were provided pre-meeting, I think. You could go research this out. So I'm going to try and give you a dozen slides in 5 minutes that will just be fast. And then I want to talk about more other stuff. So if you will, let me see if I can get this going. If you'll recall, it was 3 years ago when there was a legislative effort caused a stalemate, a delay in the capital budget considerations at the state level. So some senators wanted a resolution of a rural water moratoria that was pretty close to home, right across the divide on our way up to Mount Vernon, as well as other places. And they wanted that resolution. It involved private wells on individual parcels and prevented development of those parcels. So the legislator acted, and SSB 6091 was codified as the Streamflow Restoration Act, which to me is a little bit of a misnomer, but that's what they called it. Since October 2018, okay, now I'm trying to learn how to scroll the mouse. Oh, there we go. So since October 2018, we've been meeting 12 cities ranging from Arlington on the north, North Bend on the southeast, ranging in size from Index to Everett, joined 2 counties, 2 tribes, and a number of other stakeholders in the basin to help resolve this moratoria issue involving rural wells. You'll also hear me call them exempt wells. I'm going to go straight to the end. Go ahead. Okay, I'm going to go straight to the end here and just, here's the answer. Here's what the committee developed for the Snohomish River Basin. Earlier drafts talked about the WRIA 7. That's their water resource inventory area. It's a vague political word for river basin. And River Basin 7 in Washington State is the Snohomish Basin. Half of the city lies in the Snohomish Basin.
And that was 7, okay, so 7 out of 16.
So basically, what we have developed, the committee developed, is a 20-year plan that took the 1,780 square miles of the Snohomish Basin, divided it into 16 subbasins that were appropriate for impact evaluation. Looked at a land use analysis and estimated 3,389 permit exempt wells. So PUs or PEs or PE wells would be constructed in that time over that 20 years. Based on conventional use of single family residences, that comes out to about 800 acre feet per year. And that includes what we call a net consumptive use. In other words, it gave return flow credits for septic returns and irrigation over application, et cetera. And then, okay, that also equates to about just over 1 CFS of flow and or 500 gallons a minute, thereabouts. Those impacts are not acceptable per state law and state court decisions. And so we generated and were forced to find mitigation and offsets to help do that. And with that action, even before we got the plan implemented or get the plan implemented, homeowners are allowed to go ahead and move forward and develop. So now it's decision time regarding this plan, even though you know basically nothing about it. But the law requires that the plan be approved by the committee before it's forwarded to the state agencies for final approval. Consensus is required. There's no majority vote here. It's 100% either favor or the committee generally fails, and then the plan as is goes to the state and they finish it as they see fit. So obviously everybody doesn't want to waste 3 years of time. The plan is approved by consensus based on the committee members, active committee members indicated that in January. A formal vote after we get feedback from our entities is scheduled for April. It's currently under review and approval by all member entities, including the city of Arlington. And somewhat informally, our process is to brief directors and planning commission, show up at a city council workshop for something similar to what we're doing here. And a city council resolution is what we think we'll have by, most cities at least are trying to go down that road. Again, the plan is not contentious. So why the boredom of tonight? Partly because we have to, partly because just because it's not contentious doesn't mean I personally like the plan. So I'm voting for it. So I'm hoping to get through the formal stuff and then give you a little bit of the juicy background maybe. The plan process, to go back here, whoops. 1, 2. Can't stay in one spot. So here's how the plan was developed. Basically, we looked at that 20-year horizon. Counties were heavily involved because this is largely rural water, but we looked at where the rural water demand was projected that was not immediately adjacent to other Group A water utilities. So larger cities and rural, public utility districts, et cetera. We basically said that number of wells times some understood indoor consumptive use rate, which we all agreed and I thought was generously provided at 90% of water is not consumed. You might pass it through your body, you might shower with it, but it's going back into the ground through your septic system as a rural homeowner. You also use it for irrigation. Some basins irrigate more than others, but basically most of that water is lost during that summer irrigation period. We made the assumption that 80% is gone into transpiration, evaporation, crop growth, and only 20% makes it back. So with those return flows, if you will, we ended up with this 800 acre feet cumulative impact. Based on court decisions, again, that is not allowed. So we had to go into this, roll up our sleeves, and go through a process where we pick your word, offset or mitigate those impacts. This little code says water for water in time and place. So where there's an impact, according to state law, we have to replace that gallon of water for that other gallon of water at roughly the same time frame in roughly the same place. We have a little bit of luxury in how we interpret it based on the law, but to the extent possible, we want to do it at least by the subbasin. When that's not possible, and it's not always, then this new law is saying, look for those opportunities where you can do water for water at some alternative time and or replace water for water. Again, we're talking gallon of impact associated or, with 3,389 new wells. We're gonna have to return that same 800 acre feet. It's about 350 gallons per day for a single reservoir. So we have to find a way to do that. When we can't do the gallon for gallon, and even if we do, the law is written to say that we have to provide a net ecological benefit. And so therefore we have to come up with additional projects that would help to offset those impacts. And it's our basically way to say, look, we can come up with, for 100 gallons, we can mitigate 90 water for water, gallon for gallon, but we can't come up with 10 gallons more. What do? We're going to allow environmental improvement projects that would benefit fish populations, habitats, et cetera. Then the state's going to come back and evaluate the plan and says, is this really a net ecological benefit? Are our 3,389 wells administered under this plan really going to make things better in the end? Okay, that's the whole idea. So there you see, I heard it described to me as cake and frosting. So a lot of times this net ecological benefit is getting added in, not only, if you meet the gallon for gallon, you still have to demonstrate a net ecological benefit. And so there, depending on the opinions of the evaluators, you could find that maybe it doesn't. Just because I gave you a gallon of Aquafina for a gallon of tap water or something doesn't mean that you agree that it's even trade. And so for the cake, you might want frosting on that too. And here's that's the basin. Arlington straddles the basin. Half of the city is in the Snohomish Basin, half in the Stillaguamish. We happen to be in the Quilceda-Allen subbasin, sandwiched between Tulalip and Little Pilchuck. There's Lake Stevens right there. Okay, in there, we basically did our land use analysis. The most wells are going to happen right here in our neck of the woods. And just zoom in because that's not possible to read. 468 Tulalip wells, largely in the Tulalip subbasin, please. And that's largely going to be in the Seven Lakes area. And the Quilceda-Allen subbasin, right outside our back door, 338 permit exempt wells. We apply our estimates. The indoor consumptive use was applied across the board, all of the entire basin. Some, apparently we don't irrigate to the extent that others down by Carnation and, Carnation and some of the other East County, east of Bellevue, right, north of Issaquah, those basins, apparently do a little bit more outdoor irrigation. But we estimated consumptive use. And then we had to try and apply these projects. And initially they're separated between offsets, gallon for gallon, water for water. And we come up with some. I will tell you that the biggest, there's like 3 that do 800 to all, 500 to all of this 800 acre feet. And then there's a handful of smaller projects. The biggest one is that Lake Stevens is proposing an increase in the elevation of their outfall that would basically apply more water in a reservoir that could then be released throughout the remainder of the year, et cetera. So that's where 500 of the 800 is coming from. It's really heavy in that regard. Other projects around the basin are water for water. Some, we're finding water rights that people apparently aren't using. Other water utilities or water systems that may be able to connect to other utilities, et cetera. And then we came up with some odd number, 120 projects that would be, I think there's probably 30 priorities and then additional ones, but came up with habitat projects that are currently not funded. So this plan is to implement over the next 20 years these water offset acquisitions, retirements and these habitat improvement projects. That's what's going to happen that's how we're mitigating that. That's how we're mitigating those impacts. So that's the plan. If you look online at any of that, it's all there and a whole lot more pretty slides, et cetera. And I don't know if that actually makes any sense, but I'm going to just start talking more on my own here. You're going to see the word in here, beneficial use, several times, but just some basic water laws. Basically, water's not owned by any one individual. It belongs to the state. It requires that you put it to beneficial use. You're not allowed just to waste water for the sake of wasting. Water must be available, physically and legally available for use. And then really important here, the beneficial uses that occur first in time and first in place have a recognized priority. They're senior to junior water rights. As long as you're using that water for that beneficial use, you have a right. You stop using it, you have no right. Let's see, that's a quick espousal. And so, here we go. I haven't been driving very long. So way back when, 1917, with the development of these laws, they made some really nice clean boxes, just like in my garage. I got, when I'm done cleaning it out, it's perfect. They had a place for permit processing for surface water. Eventually they added in groundwater. Then they realized, well, small stuff doesn't really suit a permit process, but we want it to be recognized. They were there first in time, first in right? But so they have this. And so as you go through this, don't worry about the words. As you go through this, you start adding additional laws, you start adding in court decisions, and it gets more and more confusing for both sides, both boxes. And I think this is where it goes. Where it used to be, don't sweat the small stuff. Now it's kind of like, well, I don't think there is any small stuff. What used to be two distinct boxes, paths or lines or approaches or processes no longer exist. So at this point in time, the last law, the Streamflow Restoration Act, is attempting to answer some of those in place, in kind, and out of place, out of kind situations. This whole idea that what used to be, there is no minimum anymore. There used to be, you would say de minimis is a legal concept that, your impacts are no longer worth consideration. They're too small. Basically, at this point in time, the last court decision called the Hearst decision basically said there is no such thing as de minimis. If as a basin, you are not considering the impacts of even a single individual well, you don't benefit. It's not going to happen. You're going to have to mitigate. So as homeowners, as a city, we have to do the same exact process. As a city, we have to mitigate for those impacts now. As individual homeowners, you also have to mitigate. The city, the water utility, et cetera, are better positioned to actually find that mitigation. Because it was harder for individuals, they developed this process for mitigation by committee, state-funded approach. I want to tell you about this. 4 next slides is about Seven Lakes, where most of those wells, 468, were going to go. Seven Lakes is a water association that sits on the divide, just like City of Arlington does, between Stilley and the Snohomish basins, different sub-basins, but they serve several thousand customers. Almost every single one of their customers, and in fact, I take that back, every single customer, all of which are residential, there's just a small handful of commercial, every single customer is on a septic system. So here they have a few wells, they distribute, it goes to their customers, and then the return flows go just like as if it was a well, right? For an individual homeowner, this water is going back into where the well's taken from. They have proposed a number of times in the past, including from the mid 80s on, when there was supposed to be a big, new city developed over there at some point, but they were going to be part of this process. They started applying for additional water rights so that they could expand their distribution system And it would still be the same exact physical process, water out of the ground through wells, returned to the ground through septics. Well, they were denied. The last denial came while this process was still in, this committee process was still ongoing. So we started in 2018. They got their last denial for the reason being there was no water available unless you can prove that it's available, which was basically impossible when you're sitting on a divide. You have to use a groundwater model, and you have to define limits to this model that are just not realistic. So every solution is going to show an impact. So, but then here, just on the coattails of this decision, here comes this committee, my committee, and it says that, hey, we can fit 468 wells in that subbase. Not every single one is going to would have been served by Seven Lakes. Many could have been. But here we go. So instead of what Seven Lakes was wanting to do and be the supplier, now we're into this, let's put 468 new holes in the ground. Let's not worry that we have good regulation over a utility that has to operate soundly from an environmental and health perspective. So basically, that's one example of where this is a flaw. When we started, I wanted to get in and let me just step back and say the last time we had a very similar opportunity in 1998 was the Watershed Management Act. We did not participate as a city in that. And as it turned out, we ended up with a Selaguamish in-stream flow rule that the city had no input in developing, and it hurts us today. So when this was coming up, I wanted to make sure that we were at least at the table. My objective was to make sure that the water rights that municipalities have, including the city of Arlington, were not some of those water rights that would be going to offsetting individual mitigation needs. I wanted, at the same time, utilities move a lot of water around. They have the ability to meet needs like that, especially if there's some incentives, et cetera, for extending water. That's a possibility. We want to be part of that solution. I also am thinking that as we're going down this road, because the same law had primary a HERS fix, which addresses the exempt wells, also had a partial foster fix, which is affecting you more so the utilities. I thought that perhaps it would give us insights as to how we can argue our case down the road. Also, a quarter of our portfolio, water supply portfolio, is in RIA-7 near the airport as we speak. So here's some take-home points. At issue, you read this plan, it's going to say, we've got a problem. We've been permitting these wells and we don't have a way to mitigate for those impacts. That's not true. The truth of the statement, is very minor part. It's a twist, because the truth is that the court's made a decision that what used to be de minimis impact and we can live with the small stuff. We don't want to waste our time counting widgets. We'll just count widget factories instead or something. That's a problem. So there, you read in that plan, you're going to say, oh, I see, it's just a permitting issue. Well, it's more than that. Water users of all kinds now are meeting at a round table, but they're not realizing that those beneficial uses, remember I use that word beneficial use, are all at this table. And you've got mom and pop featherbed manufacturer companies that want to wash their feathers competing for the same limited natural resource as a farmer, as a tribe that's advocating for their fish, as a city that's wanting water, as an egg, as a farmer, etc. You got all of these guys at the same place, and it was quite engaging to look across tables and see not just Everett, but also Index, for example, right? And to see people that felt like they had our utility as part of their city, they had some experience there, but then you would also be paired up with other cities that didn't. Like Snohomish no longer does. They've gotten out of that business. to them, it was a whole lot less contentious. Current approach is not sustainable. So this whole thing is supposed to be a series of 20-year plans. I had so many times where I heard the ag people saying, I'm taking those water rights off the table. I don't want those. And I, at one point, said, I don't want you looking around North Quilceda Basin because we're interested in those also. And the same thing, some people wanted other sources. But at any rate, I tried to say we should have a policy that lets the legislature know that you did something in a pinch because you needed to find some solutions, but this is not a sustainable project. I fought to get that in there, and there is some text to that end, but I was really trying to get a policy. We have like 4 or 5 policies in there. I wanted to actually have it identified as a policy that was recognized that we need to do a better job about resolving this conflict, because you're going to have mom and pop and large corporations and large municipalities, at each other. Utilities are wanted to be part of the solution. In a lot of ways, water supplies are assumed to be in black boxes if you're a utility. They don't think that utilities have to go and knock their head on the wall to try to find it. At the same time, utilities aren't on the same level playing field. We tried to get return flows. A lot of the smaller distribution water systems west of Monroe that get served by Everett Water as it comes down Highway 2, Roosevelt and Highland and Three Lakes. Those systems are all serving houses on exempt on septic systems, but they don't, they don't get credit. We tried to lobby and say, hey, those return flows should be new waters used available for offsets, and we're not getting that. And then finally, zoning is a better tool. I thought I put this in as a planning commission because zoning is a better tool in managing growth than water and wastewater services. I have heard, as I was developing in my career, that wastewater especially is controlling growth. Well, here's a situation where you had utilities trying to manage growth in a somewhat conscientious way from a water resource perspective, and then especially here in this example with the Seven Lakes, just blew me away that they would say, a year ago there was no water available for Seven Lakes to staff up and to expand their distribution system. We're not going to approve these water rights because you haven't shown to us that there's actually water available. But then this committee of well-intended wannabes comes by and says, oh yeah, since they're not available, and the original text of the document was written like they're not available or they have other limitations. Well, it never said that the reason they have limitations is because they were denied expressly the opportunity to serve. So those are just I wanted you to be aware that what was in the news with development moratoria, et cetera, just across the divide, a few years ago, is still not necessarily resolved based on any silence that might have been not spoken or that might have been present since then. So. But consider yourself briefed, and I appreciate the time. Thank you so much. I'm happy to answer questions. I know that I ran on. I'm happy to answer questions if you want. I think I added a slide. Oh, there we go. So I'm available anytime. There's my phone number. There's my email. You can always contact me afterwards if you want to have the conversation or you see something that you want to resurrect.
Do you mind a question?
I don't mind questions.
I'm a little confused. Well, I'm a lot confused, but with Seven Lakes, that somehow we arrived at a situation where no Seven Lakes water you can't supply anybody else, but we're going to drill 468 wells, and somehow that's a solution.
To me, that is very big. I don't understand that, and I don't understand that at all. And I raised that. I'm pretty simplistic in my thought process, they're certainly not refined. Mark will testify to that. But when something doesn't work for mom and pop, and it's not the same. You can't say across the board that, well, big government ought to work the same, or small government ought to work the same. Still managed by the same pocketbook, the same budget, within the same constraints. And this is an example of physical, the water's there or it's not, right? And it's why would you say on one hand that, it's not there? Somebody else comes along and you say, oh, it's there. It's in my mind, I think the word environmental justice is a big term now, where you talk about, well, wait a minute, more underdeveloped communities might be bearing the load or the burden of an environmental benefit project or something. But this is almost a reverse of that, in the sense that here is a utility that's regulated by the state, that's been trying to develop, finds that they can actually they didn't even want to do new wells. They wanted to take water rights from existing wells and move them to their existing wells that really produced well. So that's what they wanted to do. They were all downstream moves. There should have been relatively little impact. But because it's on the divide and everything's a real shell, it's not like you're at the Cascade Crest. If you're on one side or the other. Here, just like at the airport, we have a similar thing. We don't know if that water divide is, at 172nd or 173rd or 168th, or where in that east-west trend along 531 is there a divide that is between Portage Creek and Quilceda. And we know it exists, but it's never been fully mapped. Similarly, and we could do that. During this process, we have been sitting on that. The city of Arlington has been in that same position since 1992, when we applied for additional water at the south end of the airport. And we're told very similarly, we'd have to do this study to evaluate where our water is coming from. As part of this process, and things got really, really complex with this Foster Court decision, basically we couldn't move off of our existing location, which is not too far from our office where we're sitting in Ellie's right there. We couldn't move off of that postage stamp for our well without having significant impacts on our water. We couldn't move it to a new location without that. During this process, we were so fed up with the whole way that we had been treated as a utility that we said, if you guys really want water that is going to actually be used, and you want to use it to put it to bed, so we had, cross off our 800 acre feet. We've got 320 of it right here. And we'd be happy to sell that. And if we can use that money then to develop more sources elsewhere. When that came down, they actually looked at that significantly, and at somebody else's dime, we had them tell us that, which we didn't want to do the same thing that Seven Lakes. We didn't want to pay an almost certain question mark of a report to say that we don't know, or you're so close, or you'll have to do more studies. That's what we were in, and they basically said, and got some agreement from multiple sides of the Department of Ecology, that all of our water comes from water that would be headed to the Portage Creek and Stillaguamish basins. All of our water at the airport. So, which is no small feat. So it's written, it's not in a letter, but it's written down on paper, and we had them validate it for us in a couple of conference calls. So we think we got a few things out of it, that being one, that we can actually, now we can move that. But even with that, as we get closer to another source, then we're going to impact the Stillaguamish River more by pumping closer to it than we would if we continue pumping here. And therefore, if we have 320 acre feet, we're only going to be able to use 300 or 200, and we're going to lose water as we move it. So, and that similar thing was going to happen with Seven Lakes. So it doesn't make any sense. To me, it's a physical process, but because there's two lines, there was originally two boxes that, we got First, we got surface water because that's where we're thinking with ranches and stuff, especially early 1900s, 1800s, late 1800s. And then, and irrigation, et cetera. Then we start going, oh, groundwater is also a big source for water now. So they have a groundwater code in 1945. Right after that, they said, well, okay, for some these small use wells, we're not going to regulate those. We're just going to let them, as long as they can show that, at my house off of Burn Road, Jordan Trails Road, I have a well that has a priority date of some day in the month of June 1995, because that's when that well went on. And so it's been put to beneficial use continuously since then. But now, if I were to try to do that today, I would have to pay $500 to, in addition to whatever my traditional permit fees were. I have to include $500 extra. Some fraction of that goes to the county to help cover their costs. The rest goes to ecology, and they use that money to help implement the projects that, as a committee, we developed, mitigation projects.
I guess my big question, what it's leading to is, where are we now? We've heard different stories about this. Where is the city now in terms of available water compared to population projection?
We have, from an annual perspective, we have water until the 2048, I believe.
Based on
my work. However,
based on whose population projection?
Oh, that's based on the city's population projections for the city as given to us from Puget Sound Regional Council.
OFM does it.
Yes, yeah, they come through OFM. But then I have also I modified things because our service area also extends outside the city. Right, we go out to 172nd along Burn Road, for example. And because of that, I looked at other growth potential of different areas. I looked at how a couple of different places grew. Mill Creek and Mount Lake Terrace, when they were brand new, they were put in as communities to develop, new cities. They weren't just little things that grew there. They were actually seeded there. I looked at how they grew. I looked at how Marysville and Everett grew when they were small and how long they stayed in their phases and stuff. So I came up with some estimates, and 4 years into it, I'm pretty close. I mean, that's just 4 years. That's nothing. That's easy. I should be close after 4 years. But at any rate, we made some estimates, and areas that we think are wanting to develop are starting to want to develop, and we'll see. Also, my assumptions that our instantaneous supplies will get really tight at the end of this decade include assumptions that we may want to serve Smoky Point, the area that is currently served by Marysville, but it's in city limits. If we were to take over those 2,000 services, and then if Breckus Beach, now East Hill, develops more, that was originally supposed to be a pretty heavy demand from there. And
if we picked up the water service in Smoky Point for Marysville, logically, wouldn't we get the water rights to go with that? Really?
No. Not necessarily.
Huh.
No. Yeah. No. There is a lot of I have a saying. I'll say this, and then I'm going to shut up. I have a saying that from the Nooksack to the Nisqually, all of these basins along this east side of the Sound, nobody manages their water resources like the city of Arlington. And not necessarily because we are the best or the smartest, it's just how we grew and developed. Every other city, with few exceptions, Ferndale maybe, takes water up high. You dewater miles and miles and miles of streams. You have to do other mitigation stuff. And then you get down to the lower end, you treat and you discharge to the sound. So that is a total 100% impact. Where we want to champion or barter for the agreement is that in Arlington, we take water out at most of our water, let's say, at the railroad trestle, the old Burlington Northern Pacific Bridge, and it goes back in right at the Highway 9 bridge, SR9. So 400 feet of dewatering, which the hydraulics of a river that size don't respond to that. So we basically have no impact except for any losses. Our water comes up and into the city, goes back out in almost the same exact spot. We want to basically say our water rights are not consumptive in the traditional sense. Our water rights are non-consumptive, much like a fish hatchery that takes water out, runs it through their egg incubators and puts it back in the river. That's considered non-consumptive. We're very similar. They have NPDES permits for fish hatcheries. We have them for, human waste treatment, wastewater treatment. So stormwater treatment things we have. So it's not that their uses are so clean. It's just that how things are addressed. But that's where I see, the whole process was interesting. I learned tons. I think the city's better positioned. We got a few benefits out of it. But the whole idea in my mind that when I saw the report and it was being presented as a permitting issue, not necessarily as you're not pitting this beneficial use of, somebody's flower garden to somebody else's sand and gravel place, right?
Any other questions from the commission?
Oh. Nope. None from you, Mark?
Long ago. I knew I was set up for failure when Caleb was done in 2 of her 3 minutes.
Well, we certainly appreciate you coming by here today, Mike, and letting us know about kind of where we're headed and what the future may look like. But also, I think the lesson or the big takeaway that I got from it was we are better off figuring out land use through zoning than we are with permitting water.
Yeah, water and wastewater for sure. Yeah.
Okay. All right. If there's no further questions on that or no more comments, again, I thank you, Mike, for being with us this evening. Were there any other things on? Did we have one more thing on the agenda, Mark? Or was that it?
Nope, that was it.
That's it.
So again, I think we've already done our public comment for today. Kristen, there were no other requests for public comment.
There are no other public comments.
Okay, thank you. So at this point, the chair requests a motion for adjournment.
Move to adjourn.
I'll second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you too. Have a great evening and we appreciate it.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Good night.